Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a pretty hidden but absolutely crucial chapter in Canadian history, the complex relationship between Black Canadians and the RCMP. It's a story of civil rights, systemic barriers, and a really long journey toward accountability. We've got some fascinating primary sources to look at today that bring this history to life, so let's just jump right in. I want you to think about this for a second. What actually happens when a nation's top police force spies on its own citizens? Well, we're going to begin right here with a question that was suddenly thrust into the national spotlight following some truly shocking newspaper revelations back in April of 1994. Imagine opening your morning paper to read that everyday community leaders were treated like enemies of the state. So, how did this all finally come to light? Thanks to the introduction of the Access to Information Act, decades of classified data were finally exposed to the public. And these weren't just routine files, they detailed the RCMP's intense systematic surveillance of Black individuals and civil rights organizations. Material that might have stayed buried forever was suddenly printed in newspapers for all to see. Those stunning revelations directly led to a historic primary document, a formal letter dated August 2, 1994. In it, RCMP Commissioner J.P.R. Murray officially apologizes for the discriminatory language and prejudiced attitudes of the past. It's a rare institutional acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Now, to truly grasp the weight of that apology, we can't just look at 1994 in a vacuum. We really need to follow this historical timeline backwards. We're going to start with the closed doors of the 1940s, walk through the heavy surveillance of the 60s, revisit that official apology in the 90s, and then push forward into the modern policing challenges of the 2000s and today. Section 1, Surveillance in the 60s. Watching the Civil Rights Movement. All right, let's flash back to the 1960s. The Black Canadian struggle for equality was met with intense institutional resistance. Organizations striving to provide a unified voice, groups like the Black United Front, the Black Educators Association, and Quacha House in downtown Halifax were systematically infiltrated and monitored. Quacha House, for instance, was basically just a place for politically engaged youth to discuss strategies, but authorities saw it very differently. It's kind of wild to look at how police interpreted these peaceful gatherings. Operatives' own writings revealed a deep paranoia. They classified basic community organizing as militant uprisings, literally labeling everyday spaces as breeding grounds for troublemakers, and the overall community climate as a possible explosive situation. Really, no stone was left unturned. And remember, this wasn't just abstract policy. It had a profound human impact. Take Burnley Rocky Jones and his wife Joan. These very records detail how, when a local community space shut down, the group moved into the Joneses' apartment. And the result? Day-to-day surveillance of his entire family. Their phone calls, their mail, their personal comings and goings, all watched daily by the RMC. Moving on to Section 2, the 1994 official apology, acknowledging past injustices. So it was the exposure of those highly invasive tactics that finally forced a major institutional reckoning 3 decades later. Commissioner Murray's 1994 statement was clear and direct. He explicitly stated he did not condone past comments and apologized for the negative reflection on the Black community. He promised a thorough review to ensure the force would learn from these errors and never repeat them. Section 3, overcoming decades of exclusion, the long road to representation. But, the historical records actually show us that this fraught relationship started way before the surveillance of the 60s. The texts outline a harsh reality. If things had been truly equal, Black men who attempted to join the force in 1941 and 1947 would have been welcomed. Instead, they faced firmly closed doors. The institutional barriers were set early, and they were thick. And the legacy of those early barriers? It was massive. Decades later, despite efforts to change, visible minorities made up a mere 6% of the force's membership. Think about that for a second. It took nearly a century for the RCMP to hire its first Black member, a really stark reminder of how early exclusion shapes an institution for generations. Of course, efforts to correct this huge imbalance eventually sparked some pretty intense public debate. Take a 2005 National Post editorial, which openly criticized the RCMP's diversity efforts. The RCMP, however, forcefully fought back against this narrative, citing their absolute duty to reflect the Canadian mosaic and strongly defending their hiring practices. Part of the RCMP's official response actually involved aggressively dismantling false claims, specifically the really damaging myth of a no white male policy. They definitively pointed out that such racially charged rhetoric is not just false, it's actively harmful. The sources explain that articles like that have a psychological effect, causing visible minority applicants to actually hide their identities or not self-identify on applications just to avoid the backlash. And finally, Section 4, Modern Challenges in Policing, the post-9/11 reality. While the force was actively working to dismantle those historical hiring barriers, new systemic issues started to emerge. Following 9/11, racial profiling became a dominant national issue. By 2005, police forces across the country were scrambling to set up preemptive policies ahead of federal legislation like Bill C-296. But, as we know, creating new rules at headquarters is one thing, ensuring they translate to actual street-level enforcement is a completely different battle. So this brings us to a final, absolutely vital question to think about. As we trace this incredible history from closed doors in the 40s to invasive surveillance in the 60s to official apologies in the 90s, can new top-down institutional policies truly succeed without fundamental changes in street-level training? History shows us that changing the rulebook is just the first step. Changing the culture takes so much more. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the history around you.